I just wanted to quickly cover a little bit on the G20, which was taking place, of course, at the weekend. And so here they all are in India for that. A bit of a fight at the end of it over the wording of the final declaration. A bit of a fight is a slight understatement. If you look at what it says there, I'm going to say it was definitely not one Earth, one family, and one future. That might be what the rules-based international order would like to see or would like it to be, but that was not what was going on at that time. The fight, of course, was over Russia, and contrary to the delusions of some, is not isolated, as we mentioned earlier. So this year's declaration does not mention Russia or Russian aggression, as the one from last year did from Mali. And the text has changed, or the language has changed, to remove the idea of the war against Ukraine to the war in Ukraine. So let's just bring this on from India's representative at the G20 was tweeting out this. The most complex part of the entire G20 was to bring consensus on the geopolitical paragraphs, brackets Russia-Ukraine. This was done over 200 hours of non-stop negotiations, 300 bilateral meetings, 15 drafts. In this, I was greatly assisted by 2 volunteers. So that is quite an incredible situation, really, for these types of events. The Russians, of course, were very happy with this. Sergey Lavrov said this. I would also like to note the important role played by the Indian presidency, which for the first time in the history of the G20 has consolidated its participants that represent the Global South. This consolidated position adopted by the Global South in defense of its legitimate interests helped thwart the West's attempt to Ukrainianize the agenda at the expense of discussing pressing issues facing developing countries. The Ukrainians, of course, had a different view, and this was from Oleg Nikolenko, saying the G20 adopted a final declaration. We're grateful to the partners who tried to include strong wording in the text. However, in terms of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, G20 has nothing to be proud of. This is how the main elements of the text could look to be closer to reality. And of course, he's put red lines through everything that he didn't like in the final declaration. Somebody who was probably most apoplectic about this was Justin Trudeau. And he was also pretty apoplectic about the fact that he was treated pretty badly by India. So this was what he tweeted out. He was putting out some positive language here. Prime Minister Modi and I met today. We spoke about our G20 priorities and progress made over the past few days, as well as our views in fighting climate change, advancing gender equality, supporting Ukraine, and upholding the rule of law. But unfortunately, he was being pretty heavily criticized by Modi because of what India describes as continuing extremist anti-India activities in Canada. And he was talking about organized crime, drug syndicates, human trafficking, and so on. Modi didn't post a welcome note to Trudeau as he did with other leaders. And so Trudeau was very keen to get away. Unfortunately, as keen as he was to get away, he couldn't because his plane broke down. And so it took him 2 extra days before he could actually get away from the place.
Would that plane have been contributing to global warming?
Well,
possibly?
It would, of course. Yeah. It would, of course. So anyway, let's just look at the language. This was the language from the G20 to recognize the importance of accelerating efforts towards phase down of unabated coal power in line with national circumstances and recognizing the need for support towards just transitions, because it wasn't just the Ukrainian situation that the West was very unhappy with. It was also the climate change position, because as you can see from this, they're absolutely not prepared to stop phase down of unabated coal power, because it will only happen in line with national circumstances and in line with just transitions. And in fact, this has been talked about over the last 6 months or so, because both Russia and China have, for example, stated that they are intending to give Afghanistan, build them new coal-fired power stations in order to try to bring Afghanistan into the 20th century, never mind the 21st century. So the green agenda not going too well at the G20 either. And of course, that will just bring this, the other aspect of this that the West was trying to generate was separation between India and China, break that relation, drive a wedge in there. This was the Global Times from just before the G20, who is the spoiler of the G20 Summit in New Delhi, and they're really highlighting the fact that in this article that there has been this attempt to drive a wedge between India and China and try to break this whole thing up. and it just wasn't going to work.
Yeah, interesting times. Okay.